If you watch the news of my country, you probably think that I live in a super racist place where it's almost impossible for African Americans to have opportunities, and that even puts whites at a higher level on the totem pole. To answer the question, is the US getting more racist? We have to look at history to see what we are comparing to. Take this journey with me and let's learn a little bit about the history of racism in the United States. Chapter 1. Slavery. During the 17 and 1800s, slavery was very common in the United States, and it was crucial for the American economy. While most slave owners were white and most slaves were African American, there was also some black slave owners and some white slaves. Heck, even the word slave comes from the word Slav, which is a word that was used to describe Slavic people. However, to make the injustice a little bit more bearable for slave owners, they preferred owning black slaves because it was easier to separate themselves from the slaves and think of them as another species or less than them. These rich slave owners even paid scientists to research skull shapes and try and find reasons why African Americans were different than whites. Luckily, after a couple hundred years, the United States started to realize that slavery was a terrible thing and that it would be much better for everybody if it did not exist. But there was one problem. The South relied on slavery for their whole economy, which was mostly based on agriculture. And another problem, the Southern states didn't like that the Northern states were telling them what to do in their own state. This is what led to the Civil War, which up until today is the bloodiest war in American history. To get an idea for how many Americans died, here is a graph showing different wars that Americans have fought in, which none of them have as many American casualties as the Civil War. So yeah, during the Civil War, hundreds of thousands of Americans died to abolish slavery. And I think we should note that a big majority of those Americans which died to abolish slavery were white people. And I think that this is the start of the progress that we see today. Chapter 2. Slavery is banned, Jim Crow and sharecropping. After the war was won by the North, the South wasn't really happy with the idea of African Americans being on the same level as whites. For this reason, they started creating things which we refer to as Jim Crow laws. These laws said that whites and African Americans would go to different schools, attend different movie theaters, restaurants, and even use different bathrooms. To make matters worse, they also started a new form of slavery, which was called sharecropping. Sharecropping was essentially volunteer slavery, where a lot of ex-slaves would actually go back and work for their old slave owners. The difference is that the slave owner would no longer feed them, clothe them, and do all of that for free. Instead, he would pay them with a share or a portion of the crops that they would grow. And in the meantime, everything they ate, all their clothes, their housing, usually was given to them with a debt or a request to be paid back at a later date. This made sharecropping maybe even a bit worse than slavery because it had people who were constantly in debt to their bosses. Chapter 3. The rise of the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan was founded after the Civil War, and it was essentially originally just a group of Confederate veterans. The Confederates were who fought for the South. So keep that in mind. Confederate veterans who got together and decided that they wanted to terrorize African Americans and terrorize whites who loved African Americans. It was extremely disgusting, and I really can't think of anything scarier than that. Eventually, though, it was banned in 1944 because they were committing acts of terror against African Americans and other minority groups. However, the group still exists today. It just isn't as violent and doesn't have as many followers. But hey, learning English will bring so many opportunities to your life. So if you really want to take English seriously, you should get a private tutor. Down in the description, Italki will give you $10 off your first private session so that you can try it and see how much it helps you. Check out the link in the description if you're interested. Now let's get back into the video. Chapter 4, The Call for Change. In the 1950s and 60s, there were two men who were just blowing the minds of Americans, both for better and for worse. The first one was Martin Luther King. He was a man who saw the future of our country before anyone else could. He saw whites and blacks living together in peace. And one of his most famous quotes was, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." This man gave hope to everybody who wanted peace. And nowadays, we even have a national holiday where we celebrate Martin Luther King for his amazing speeches and the hope that he gave to our country when we needed it most. And the second one is Malcolm X. Malcolm X was arguably equally influential, however, not in the exact same way. Malcolm wanted more separation, more segregation. He wanted African Americans to live in completely different areas all the time and not have to live even under the same government as the white man. He thought that whites and blacks could never live together in peace. And these calls for segregation and separation were something that really excited the youth at that time. But unfortunately, at the end, both Martin Luther King and Malcolm X were murdered. However, their words, their speeches, their ideas still live with us today. Chapter 5, Millennials and Gen Zs, Our Idols and Friends. This is an interesting part of the story where I think everything really changed on a big scale. And that is my generation and the generation before me. We grew up in a country where African Americans were the entrepreneurs, the musicians that we all listened to and we all respected. I mean, when I was just 10 years old, my first album was Akon's Convict album. And it just inspired me so much. And I always looked up to him. He was an idol for me. And after listening to those albums and going to school with African Americans, how could a kid be racist? And honestly, because I had these idols, these people I looked up to who were African American, the idea of racism never really existed in my head until my teachers were telling me about it in school. However, not everyone has had that opportunity to be around African American culture. And that's something I want to highlight, which is white kids in the country. So if I was from the countryside, I might have been from a family that only listened to country music, that lived in a place where there was really only white people. And so I wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet so many African Americans and to idolize African Americans. This is the case for many kids my age, younger, and it continues to be the case. And for them, because they don't have that opportunity, it's much more likely that they are going to be a bit racist. I'm not saying that they all are, of course not. But they are certainly more likely to be racist because they don't have that exposure. So is the United States more racist than before? I think we both know that it is absolutely not. I mean, people of color used to get terrorized constantly. They couldn't even sit with whites. These days, we go to school together and we make friends with each other without obsessing over skin color. And I think if you look at a lot of the successful people in my country, you'll realize that it really has nothing to do with race anymore. It has more to do with ambition and hard work. While before, blacks were almost certain to be slaves, now we have hundreds and hundreds and thousands of millionaires and many, many billionaires. Just to list a few, we have Kanye West, who's worth $2 billion, Oprah Winfrey, worth $3 billion, Tiger Woods, worth $1.3 billion, Rihanna, $1.4 billion, and Michael Jordan, who's worth $1.2 billion. So I think that we both can see that the United States has progressed a lot over the last 100 years. We have reached a time where, regardless of your skin color or your background, you can be extremely successful with hard work and dedication. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this subject, and if you want the flashcards so you can review the more advanced expressions and words used in this video, check out the description. It will be there for you. I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.